Yeah, thanks, Sasha, for the introduction. And I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this very nice meeting. And my talk is not directly related to research of axions, but in fact, there is some link because it's about the field effect that was announced a few years ago by the Italian group. And if this effect were true, then of course it can be used for building a whole lot of new devices, including parametric amplifiers, which are in great demand now for axion search and other very sensitive experiments. But in fact, our results do not support this interpretation, I mean the field effect, and there is an alternative explanation for the observed suppression of the critical current. So this is a team that was involved. All the experiments were done in Lancaster, and these results, even though they were obtained quite a while ago, perhaps about 3 years ago, they were published just recently, and here is the link to the publication. Yes, and our experiments were inspired by the experiments of the group of Francesca Gazzotta, and this group and Francesca, they are all our friends and collaborators. We had a joint travel grant when these experiments were started. And here are some examples of his early publications, starting with the first one in Nature Nanotechnology 2018, where they claimed that the suppression of the current that they observed is related to the field effect in superconducting nanowires. Here is a picture from their publication. This is a cartoon, and this is a SEM colored SEM image. In this particular experiment, they studied just the charge transport through a nanowire made of 30 nanometer thick titanium, deposited and patterned on a silicon oxide substrate. And then in the measurements, everything looks quite normal, no surprises. There is a superconducting transition to about 400 milli-K, which is quite okay for titanium. And then the magnetic field dependence also suppresses, magnetic field suppresses the superconductivity at above 150 millitesla. Then the IV curves show a hysteresis which resembles the one Evgeny showed in the previous presentation. So when you reach the critical current, you switch to the normal branch, and then you need to decrease the current quite a bit to switch back to the superconducting state because of the overheating in the normal wire. And then if you plot the dependence of the critical current on temperature, it nicely follows the dependence predicted by the BCS theory. So there are no surprises so far. But then they started these IV curves at certain gate voltages, and you see the characteristic scale for the gate voltages is quite large. So usually it's in the range of tens of volts. And what they see is the current, which is maximum at 0 gate voltage, decreases, and eventually it is suppressed completely at about plus minus 40 volts, as you see here. And this effect was attributed to the field effect in superconductors. And this is quite surprising, because if this is true, it means that the screening, which is quite efficient in metallic and superconducting devices, it just doesn't work. It means that the electric field somehow penetrates into the bulk of the material. And this was completely unexpected, and it wasn't predicted by any existing theories. And then they studied this effect at different temperatures, and commonly what is seen is that there is a flat region where there is basically no effect of the gate on the critical current. And then depending on the temperature, you have suppression of the current, and you need higher voltage at higher temperatures to see the suppression. You see the width of this flat part is getting wider when you go to higher temperatures. So they've done quite many experiments with different superconductors, titanium, aluminum, vanadium, using different substrates such as silicon, silicon oxide, sapphire. And what was interesting, the same effect was observed not only in the superconducting structures, but also in the proximate nanowires. So they made a copper nanowire which was connected to the superconducting leads, and the effect was quite similar. Also, they saw a similar effect in the squid structures, and this they attribute this to the perturbation of the pairing potential caused by the electric field. So we had lots of discussions with them, and I mentioned we had a travel grant, so we visited each other's labs, and inspired by these discussions, we decided to do the experiment at high temperature to test this effect. And if this were true, we could build a parametric amplifier. So this is a optical image of the chip that was made. We used vanadium deposited on a silicon oxide, and it was patterned such that we had just one feed line, which you see going from left to right on the chip. And then we had 4 λ/4 resonators. So 1, 2, and then 3 and 4, capacitively coupled to the feed line. And this is a multiplexing circuit that is quite commonly used in experiments with qubits and other types of experiments. So using just one microwave tone from the generator, we can address all these 4 resonators individually and study their characteristics. And in the presentation, I'll just focus on one resonator because the effects we observed on different resonators were quite similar. So where is this weak link? This is a λ/4 resonator, so we have an open end which is coupled to the feed line, and then on the other end of the resonator we have this type of constriction. So the resonator connects to the ground through this constriction, and we have 2 gates, so we can apply relatively high voltage and see how this voltage affects the properties of the resonator. And by using the circuit, which is schematically shown here, we can apply DC voltages, we can send a signal through the feed line, and using this homodyne technique, we can measure S21 characteristics of the resonators. Okay, everything is clear, and the idea is very simple. If we have a weak link, then by applying the gate voltage, we suppress the critical current, and the critical current is related to the Josephson inductance, and this inductance is in series to the geometric inductance of the resonator. So we control this term. It means that the total inductance will be changed, and the frequency of the resonator, expressed by this simple formula, should change. And indeed, we saw the change of the resonance frequency, and a few curves at different gate voltages are shown here. Starting from low voltages and up to about 20 or 30 volts, there is basically no effect. And then at higher voltages, the frequency shifts to the left. It means the resonance frequency decreases. And this is what we expect, because if we suppress the current, we increase the inductance, and the frequency should go down. That's all fine. But what we saw is that, I guess you can see with the bare eye, that the noise of these curves, of the resonant curves, gets larger at higher voltages. And also, if you look carefully, the width of the dip corresponding to the resonance also increases, which means that the Q factor goes down. And this is a bit unexpected because, you know, if you control a reactive parameter such as the Josephson inductance, you shouldn't introduce more dissipation to the system, more noise. And if you plot the Q factor as a function of the gate voltage, this is shown by this orange curve. It remains more or less the same, constant, and then above a certain voltage of the order of 30 volts, the Q factor goes down. It means that the dissipation increases. And this is something unexpected for a purely reactive control of the system. So then we focused a bit more on the noise properties of the resonator. What we could do is we can fix the working point somewhere on the slope of this transmission curve and see how this voltage changes in time. And here are two traces corresponding to two different gate voltages. One is measured at 50 volts, which is purple, and the other measured at 20 volts, which is gray. You see the big difference in the noise. And then in order to compare noises at different gate voltages, we converted the voltage noise into the frequency noise. And this is how we did it. So these are our traces of the voltage as a function of time. At 20 volts and 50 volts, clearly the noise increases. And just because we know the slope of our transfer characteristics, this noise can be easily converted into the frequency noise, shown as these green dependencies. So it's not only that the amplitude of the noise increases, but we also see some step-like or telegraph-like features, which are indications of the presence of two-level fluctuators. And then we can convert these time traces into the noise spectra, and they are shown here for different gate voltages, again starting from 20 volts, then 30 up to 50 volts. And interestingly, the noise increases not only quantitatively, it grows, but also qualitatively. The slope of these spectra changes from being roughly flat, which corresponds to the white noise, to roughly 1/f noise. And the slope of the spectra is described by this exponent k. And if you plot k as a function of the gate voltage, again, pretty same dependence. Nothing happens up to about 25-30 volts, and then k increases, and eventually it becomes quite close to 1, meaning that the noise is 1/f noise. And what we know from various studies, 1/f noise can be at least phenomenologically described by a very large collection of two-level fluctuators with a wide spread of switching times. And this is perhaps what happens in this system, that by applying a very high field, we somehow excite all these two-level fluctuators, which as an ensemble produce this 1/f noise. Okay, let's move further. We also examined noise histograms. We plot the switching probability as a function of the frequency. And what we see is that this probability is a perfect Gaussian curve, which is shown by this solid line at low voltages, say up to about 20 volts. But when it becomes higher, at 50 volts, for example, this is the purple curve. It gets distorted from the Gaussian shape, which is an indication that perhaps the system is not in thermal equilibrium. again, under the effect of very intense fields present in the system. Right, and then what came to our mind is that, you see, we have two electrodes, the gate and the constriction, pretty close to each other. It's not a normal tunnel junction where you have a barrier of the order of a few nanometers thick. Here, the barrier can be represented by this rectangle. So D in our case is perhaps close to 100 nanometers. But on the other hand, the voltages which are applied, tens of volts, they exceed any characteristic voltages or energies, such as barrier heights, which are for aluminum-based structures, usually in the range of electron volts. And in fact, for any other metals, because the barrier height is dependent on the work functions, and whatever metal you take, the work functions are always of the order of, say, a few electron volts, say 4 or 5 electron volts. So applying such high electric fields causes strong distortion of the barrier. And what happens is that the barrier becomes very thin, and this makes the tunneling probability for electrons quite high. And this effect is quite old. It's called the Fowler-Nordheim tunneling or Fowler-Nordheim emission. So it describes electron tunneling under intense electric fields when the barrier is suppressed quite a lot. And here is a simplified expression for this model. So the current flowing through such structure depends exponentially. And here we have alpha, which contains the barrier parameters, the height of the barrier and the thickness of the barrier. And the electric field is here in the exponential function and also in the prefactor. Interestingly, if you put our all the numbers, like the barrier thickness, we can, and doing the fit, we can extract the barrier height of the order of electron volt. So what you see on this picture is a shift of the frequency, which I shown before by the blue dots. This is our Q factor, yellow, and the green is a derivative of the current. So it's a conductance as a function of the gate voltage, and we're just using this previous formula. Of course, we should differentiate it, which is not a big deal. And then we fit this experimental curve with this simple formula, and from that we extracted the barrier height, which looks quite reasonable, of the order of 1 electron volt. And then we did the same for the data reported in the papers by the Francesca group. So this is from the original publication, Nature Nanotechnology. We just took the curve from the paper and digitized it. And then again, a very perfect fit. And this is another IV curve from Nano Lett, same year. So the dots are experimental data points, and the black line basically coincides with these data points. Again, perfect fit. So it seems all these effects can be easily, wait a second, not the effects, the shape of the IV curve. So this is an IV curve between the gate and the constriction. And the shape can be perfectly explained by this Fowler-Nordheim model. And then it means that at certain gate voltages, in our case, it was, say, at about 25-30 volts. And in this experiment, also about 25-30 volts. But depending on the sample, and this can be looked at in different publications, this voltage can vary quite a lot. Sometimes it can be even below 10 volts. And I think it depends on the particular sample, on the quality of the process. Maybe there are some residues of some materials on the surface, but nonetheless, if we assume that there is a leakage between the gate and the constriction, then at such high voltages, all these charge carriers, perhaps electrons, they carry enormous energies. And it means when they arrive on the constriction, this energy dissipates, and each electron with an energy of the order of 10 electron volts destroys a very large number of Cooper pairs. So locally, the superconductivity gets suppressed, and therefore the critical current is suppressed too. And it's at high enough energies means that high enough voltages, the critical current can be suppressed completely, which was seen in one of the first slides. And we did study the frequency shift as a function of the gate voltage at different temperatures. So here at 10 milli-K, 1.7 K, and you see qualitatively this dependence, the frequency shift, looks very similar to the dependence of the suppression of the critical current. The flat part, which gets wider with temperature. And this is also quite easy to explain. At higher temperature, the critical current gets suppressed, and in order to suppress it more, you need to apply more energy into the system, which means you need to apply higher gate voltage to the system. So this is basically our explanation. And if we consider two possible explanations of the observed effects, either the field effect that was claimed by the group of Francesca, or dissipation caused by high energy quasiparticles, it seems this the second explanation is more reasonable. And besides our effect, our experiment, there were two more experiments by one is a Harvard group and the other is a Swiss group, also very recent publications, and their explanation is quite similar to ours. So there is an injection of high energy quasiparticles that destroys superconductivity locally and suppresses the critical current. And this is supported by basically three observations. First, the increase of dissipation, the Q factor drops. Second, the noise increases. Of course, these are two related to each other through fluctuation dissipation theorem. And finally, the distortion of this distribution function, which is an indication of non-equilibrium state of the system. And all these effects are probably caused by some kind of two-level fluctuators in the system. And what these fluctuators are, microscopically, it's still not clear. I think it's a good subject for theorists to come up with some model that can explain all these dependencies. I think this is all I wanted to present, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Great. That's really very interesting. And questions, please. Professor Möttönen, please.
Thanks, Yuri, for the really clear talk. I have a couple of questions. Maybe first, one question is that I remember was it in the Nature Nanotech paper or one of Francesco's papers, they tried these different substrates and then they had these samples, they compared different substrates, and in some substrates they had really low, I think it was the sapphire that they had the lowest sort of currents. And then it seemed to me, at least from the data when I looked at it, that somehow the suppression of the critical current then seemed to be of the same order independent of the current that was leaking through the gate. So like, I think it was somehow that in the sapphire case, and or was it in the silicon case, the currents were orders of magnitude different, but yet they saw similar, I mean, suppression of critical current at the similar voltage. Do you have an explanation for this observation?
Maybe not exactly, but what I can say is that in one of the papers, I think it was Nano Letters, this one, Nano Letters, you see, judging from the title, ultra-efficient superconducting diamond bridge field effect transistor, here they present the results when the gate voltages at which the suppression was observed were of the order of 10 lower compared to the initial observations. I think this can be explained, you know, it's a quality of the gap between the gate and the constriction. There may be dozens of reasons why the leakage may be higher in one case and lower in the other case. And I don't think I can go in all the details trying to
okay.
better to ask
okay.
them what method was used and what were the difference in the processing. Or it may just depend on the substrate, because some substrates may be a bit leakier compared to others, depending on the doping of silicon. Yeah,
Exactly.
I'm not sure I know all the details.
Okay, but I was just wondering that there was this orders of magnitude difference in the leakage current, but then similar, the voltage didn't seem to vary much, but that's yeah, very detailed thing. Then just if you look at this, can you maybe go back to the slide where this is main results, maybe one slide more back? I just wanted to make a comment. Yes, not this one, but the previous, I think this previous one. No, the one where you have the critical current as function of gate voltage at different temperatures. Do you have that data here? Here. So when we look at this data, it seems that all of those curves meet at zero. Like at the same voltage, it seems that all of them, when the critical current hits zero, actually that's the point where all of these curves meet, right? So if the gap was going smaller when you increase gate voltage, wouldn't the critical temperature also decrease of that constriction? So wouldn't you expect the critical current to get to zero at lower gate voltages at higher temperatures? But now it seems that somehow the suppression point is, you know, the 0 point is always at the same voltage, or equivalent. If you look at like gate voltage 30, it seems that temperatures 5, 50, and 100 millikelvin, they give the same critical current. Wouldn't you, if it was the smaller gap, wouldn't you expect the gap to be suppressed already at 100 millikelvin because it's already suppressed at 0 volts at 100 millikelvin? It's just.
Mika, I agree that if the gap is already suppressed by temperature, then perhaps you need a lower gate voltage to suppress it completely. And I think maybe on this scale, they look like they all meet at the same point. But maybe if you zoom in and study this region more carefully, it seems these yellow and green curves corresponding to lower temperatures, they are slightly at higher. They go to zero, they correspond to the zero current at higher gate voltages, and the curves at higher temperature, for example, this one, I think it goes to zero earlier. Of course, it's just qualitative explanation, and perhaps you need a bit more thorough theory to explain on this, but I guess there is no contradiction. This is exactly what you expect. It's not the same.
Yeah, what you expect from your explanation, what you suggest.
Yeah, but it's not the same voltage, as you can see.
Yeah, not exactly.
Not exactly, yeah, but how different it is, it must be compared really very carefully. But at least qualitatively, I don't see any contradiction to this explanation.
Thank you.
Okay, more questions? Then let's thank the speaker for a very interesting talk and move on.